Hello. This is part 2 of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in Psycholand. The link for part 1 is in the description. Please like, share, and subscribe. Now, this is about where my research took me on psychiatry. The surprise truth about multiple personality, which they now call Dissociative Identity Disorder, the Oedipus complex, and also Narcissism. I did thorough research on all this. I searched the internet for the history of psychiatry, and I went to the Los Angeles County Library, where I was living at the time, Los Angeles, to find books on the history of psychiatry. Among the many that I found, I read books like Mental Ills and Bodily Cures by Joel Braslow, A History of Psychiatry from the Era of the Asylum to the Age of Prozac by Edward Shorter, Elliot Wallenstein's book, Great and Desperate Cures, and even a book by Dr. Benjamin Rush, who was called the father of American psychiatry, written in 1812, called Observations and Inquiries upon the Diseases of the Mind. Now, in Dr. Bregan's book on ECT, Brain Disabling Treatments in Psychiatry, the evidence confirmed in a 2007 study by Dr. Harold Sackheim that ECT is a brain-damaging treatment. This is explicit. I also read books with specific issues in psychiatry, such as multiple personality, including Three Faces of Eve and Civil. I read about Antonio Muniz, the man who conceived of the lobotomy, and Dr. Freeman, the man who made lobotomy treatment for over 35,000 people just in the United States, which was touted at the time as a miracle cure. Lobotomy was such a miracle cure, it is today completely discredited as a brain-mutilating monstrosity. But it made Dr. Freeman a wealthy man. It was such a miracle cure that a man is unable to get an erection in his cured post-lobotomy life. This is something that is not commonly known. They don't want you to know this. I even read with horror the Howard Dully story, co-authored by Dully himself, which tells of the 12-year-old Dully being given a lobotomy by Dr. Freeman. I reviewed a book I had read years ago called Listening to Prozac, which discusses the almost unbelievable changes in some people's behavior after taking Prozac, which brought to mind the book Flowers for Algernon. The only difference being, as long as people took the Prozac for depression, unlike the tragic story Flowers for Algernon, these people taking Prozac maintained the positive changes to their moods. Listening to Prozac also recounts the complete history of pharmacology and the field of psychiatry. It's a very good book. Now, what struck me as fantastic in the field of psychiatry, and hard to believe, is that all the normal medical rules, they just don't apply. Psychiatrists have no objective test to prove any of the conditions they thought existed, with very, very few exceptions. If someone has tuberculosis, syphilis, or a simple infection, there's an objective test to confirm or refute that condition. Even a broken limb is confirmed with an X-ray. However, in the world of psychiatry, all that is needed is the opinion or belief of a psychiatrist with no tests to objectively confirm or deny whatever condition is diagnosed. Why is this? Is this medicine? Is this science? No, it's not science. And if it's medicine, it's bad medicine. So I wrote a book with the title, Psychiatry is Not a Science. And my opening involved a dramatic courtroom scene where two psychiatrists give conflicting diagnosis on someone, ranging from the defendant is a homicidal killer to the defendant is a saint. Now, who are we to believe? How about flipping a coin? Because you have as much chance of coming to the truth with a flip of a coin as a jury has trying to decide between two completely opposite portrayals of a person with no objective evidence from the psychological experts in the field. They have no evidence to support any of this. Now, these are both prosecution and defense lawyers. They bring in people who have no evidence to substantiate what they're saying. And since both the prosecution and defense put forth people they claim are experts to the jury, then what these psychological experts assert to the jury is credible to the jury. And the jury has every reason to believe that they should accept this information, which on its face is contradictory and therefore hardly expert testimony providing any kind of actual proof. In fact, in my research, I found a famous case involving a Dr. Charcot, famed neurologist who, in the 19th century, claimed to have discovered a disease called hysteroepilepsy, mental disorder. One of his students thought something was not quite right about his conclusion and actually proved to Dr. Charcot that hysteroepilepsy was a condition brought on by the belief of the patient and his doctors that this person had this condition. When the doctor stopped encouraging the patient to behave as if they had this mental disease, the symptoms of this mental disorder disappeared. So what you actually had was a condition that was induced by the therapist, a self-fulfilling prophecy on their part. Once they make the diagnosis, the patient, wanting to be a good patient, proceeds to exhibit the behavior the therapist wants to see. Now, this is a very well-known case in the history of medicine. It shows just how suggestible people really are. So, if Dr. Charcot had shown up in a courtroom to testify that a defendant had hysteroepilepsy, as a famed neurologist, he would have certainly convinced the jury about his diagnosis. And the doctor and the jury would have both been completely wrong. This shows the importance of psychiatrists needing objective tests to prove a patient has any condition. And it begs the question as to why they don't. This also begs the question as to why psychologists are even allowed to give testimony in a courtroom when it's not fact-based. It's not evidence-based. As I researched all this data, I kept looking at multiple personality cases. I had seen the creepy movies like Sybil and the Three Faces of Eve, and of course the motion picture classic Psycho, over the years. Now, in my lifetime, I have seen people with all kinds of illnesses, injuries, diseases, including amputations, crippling arthritis, diabetes, cancer, people with brain damage from head injuries, and those with tumors literally growing all over their body. I'd seen people talk to themselves, get angry over nothing, be afraid of non-threatening events, attack people out of the blue, and talk all kinds of nonsense. Yet I had never seen anyone exhibit multiple personality except on a movie or television screen or in a book. Nor have I known anyone who has known anyone with this condition. There was something about these cases that didn't seem to make sense. If the field of psychiatry could misrepresent ECT, then why not other mental conditions as well? I remember the statement I had heard repeatedly over the years about multiple personality, and that is that there was no evidence to prove that condition existed. I wanted to find out if this was true. I read all the major cases on multiple personality, a condition renamed in the 1980 DSM-3, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It was renamed Dissociative Identity Disorder. Remember the word dissociative. It is interesting to note that the official medical diagnosis of Dr. Corbett H. Thigpen and Dr. Herbie M. Klecki in The Three Faces of Eve is not a medical report, but a novel they wrote. A novel. A novel is not a medical documentation of this condition. Not about how to diagnose it or how to treat it. It was a novel to enrich themselves with this new and fascinating psychiatric disorder that was creepy. It was really more of a horror story, actually. I pored over every case again and again, including the completely fictional ones. It was a confusing bunch of data until I separated the so-called true stories of multiple personality, like Sybil, from the fictional ones like Psycho. Now, what caught my attention was when I separated these cases and their dates. The earliest case of multiple personality ever recorded was the fictional story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, published in January 1886. At first, I was not sure what to make of the evidence trail for the origins of multiple personality, ending at the Jekyll and Hyde tale, with nothing prior being able to be found. I thought about all the literature I had read in getting my bachelor's degree in English literature, trying to find some reference to this condition, now renamed Dissociative Identity Disorder. In literature, the one thing constantly reviewed is the antecedents of any literary piece. Who was the first to do something like write the first detective story? Where did Shakespeare get the story of Hamlet? Who wrote the first novel? In fact, anybody who has achieved anything in literature is thoroughly familiar with all the literature that has preceded it. Just like any painter today studies all the painters who preceded them. So I reviewed the historical literary analysis of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in addition to rereading the actual tale of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Surprisingly, there are no antecedents mentioned in any literary analysis, anywhere that I could find, and I did a thorough search. There is no other story about a man or a woman having two different personalities or more than two in all of literature before the Robert Louis Stevenson story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, published in 1886. Furthermore, the story's origin is famous in literary annals because Stevenson was awoken by his wife one night while having a nightmare. And that nightmare, that's what he turned into the story, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So, not even the original Dr. Jekyll story had any basis in an actual case of any human being. In fact, the Jekyll story is the hypothetical conjecture of what would happen or could happen if you were able to separate someone's evil side from their good side. Now, in the fictional story, Dr. Jekyll must take a chemical potion to be transformed into the evil Mr. Hyde. There is no spontaneous psychological transformation. There is nothing in Shakespeare, Greek literature, or anywhere else in literature on multiple personality. Now, how could this be? Wouldn't a condition that is common in man have some inkling in stories and literary history, private writings, or referenced by historians? Now, on the other hand, the media from print to movies to television historically has routinely referenced the Jekyll and Hyde tale when they talk about stories of people who claim to have multiple personality disorder. They always bring them up. Why would a fictional story that has no connection to a spontaneous psychological transformation from one personality to another be mentioned in any case of an alleged actual case of multiple personality, of an actual spontaneous psychological transformation? There is no connection between the two. They are completely different in origin. One occurring in Dr. Jekyll because of a magic potion, and the other occurring supposedly from a genuine spontaneous psychological transformation from some kind of trauma, as claimed by Figman and Klecki in The Three Faces of Eve. After doing a thorough review of the data I had assembled, it was clear that multiple personality, the origin of it, is the Robert Louis Stevenson tale of fiction, a made-up story about people who never existed. Otherwise, there will be mention of this condition in literary writings prior to the Stevenson tale. In fact, there's no mention of this kind of a condition in even anyone's personal journals over the centuries. Nothing like entry like, saw Steve today, he said he was Jim. Asked Steve if he wanted to go fishing. Steve said he hated fishing. I always go fishing with Steve. Saw him later in the day, he said he didn't remember seeing me that morning. And he would have remembered if I'd asked him to go fishing, because he loves to go fishing. So there's absolutely no mention anywhere in history before the Dr. Jekyll tale. Now, these personal journals, like literature itself, have been read by hundreds of thousands of people over decades. And any mention of a condition like multiple personality would have stood out like a sore thumb. It would have been brought to the attention of the public, at least by professionals and even some amateurs who do read these journals. Now, you can find mention in writings of the past of diseases like tuberculosis, syphilis, warts, and even the common cold. But history is blank on multiple personality until the Jekyll tale. The Jekyll tale is a gothic science fiction horror story and is constantly mentioned in any discussion on multiple personality. Why? There's no connection. Additionally, if you read the Jekyll tale, it gives you the objective tests for multiple personality. Now, Mr. Hyde, he had his own residence, his own clothes, his own friends, his own taste in social events, even his own bank account. There's a trail of physical evidence to prove the alter personality is a separate and distinct person, which is part of the current psychiatric definition of DID, multiple personality. None of the people who have claimed to have multiple personality in the true stories have any trail of evidence to demonstrate a genuine alter personality. None whatsoever. You go to their houses, no additional clothing in their residence for the other personalities, no friends showing up to see the alter personalities, no packages arriving for the different personalities, no different kinds of foods in the kitchen that one personality would eat but that the other wouldn't eat. Also, where does each personality get their money? Do they both have jobs? This would be easy to verify. I don't know how they get ID, but in fact, if they both had jobs, they would both have to have identification identifying them as distinct individuals. Now, if the funds for one personality is coming out of the account of the other, this would certainly be noticed by the personality who's actually earning the income. All you have with so-called evidence of multiple personality is just one person sitting in a chair becoming whoever the psychiatrist wants them to become. I want to talk to Eve White now. Now I want to talk to Eve Black. This is just like what you will see if you witness the performance of a stage hypnotist working audience members. If you go, and I suggest you do, you will see a stage hypnotist show. You will see people act like inanimate objects, animals, and even other people. People are very suggestible. Remember Charcot. I have not only seen a stage hypnotist at work, I got on stage one night when I was at a club to see if I was hypnotizable. I was not, and the stage hypnotist got me off the stage as soon as he found out I was not a good subject for hypnosis. Now, after the publication of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, there begins a slow increase in multiple personality diagnosis. Essentially, these are hysterical diagnoses. And then multiple personality diagnoses are worldwide within a century, with not just 2 or 3 personalities, but in some cases claiming hundreds. It is clear that all cases of DID or multiple personality start with the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I researched other conditions that had literary connections, like the Oedipus complex, which gets its name from the Greek play Oedipus Rex, and also I researched narcissism, which gets its name from the Greek myth about Narcissus. Now, the Oedipus complex comes from Freud's book, The Interpretation of Dreams, pages 160, 163. And from only 3 lines from that play, Freud launched the famous Oedipus complex based on the following lines from the play itself. For many a man hath seen himself in dreams, his mother's maid, but he who gives no heed to such like matters bears the easier life. Now, it's only 3 lines, yet Freud claims universality of a psychological condition from these few lines from a Greek play from over 2,000 years ago. The key phrase is many a man. Many a man is not most men, much less all men. If the so-called Oedipus complex is a stage all male children go through, then the reference would be to a dream that all men have, not just many men. And there would be more references in literature than one Greek play from 2,000 years ago. Where are the other examples in human historical writings, since, according to Freud, all men as children go through the Oedipus phase? I know of none, nor could I find any. Nor does Freud make the logical claim that these references must be found in other literature because, as he claims, all men go through the Oedipus phase. Nor does Freud make the effort to find other examples in literature or any historical writings to try to prove his theory, which hardly demonstrates any kind of professionalism. It's more sensationalism. Even as an undergraduate student in literature, if I wanted to assert something, I better have some examples to back it up. And certainly more than one. Now we come to narcissism. This is really interesting. The origins of which is from the Greek and Roman myth of Narcissus or Narcissus, depending if it's Roman or Greek. Narcissus in the Greek and Roman story is a character who is supposedly in love with himself. So much so that he simply does not form any relationships that a male would normally make. He does not use women or abuse them. He simply is not interested in a relationship. Now, Narcissus hurts no one in this myth, intentionally at least. However, his fate is sealed when he comes into contact with Echo. Who is Echo? Echo in this story is a nymph in Greek mythology, a female nature deity, typically associated with a specific location or natural feature. They are often depicted as beautiful young maidens and are not immortal, but have very long lifespans. Now, Echo, in Greek mythology, her own myth, she was destined to fate, per her own myth, that she could only repeat the sounds of the last words of others. One day she spotted and fell in love with Narcissus, so she followed him through the woods, but could not speak without repeating Narcissus's own words when he responded. So Narcissus attempts to communicate with her are in vain, because all he hears is his own words repeated back at him. But when Echo reveals himself, Narcissus makes it clear he is not interested. Echo, however, is furious at being rejected. She plays to Nemesis, the goddess of retribution, to demand, in her mind, justice. That Narcissus should be made to feel the same pain as she did by being unable to satisfy his desire for someone else, like she couldn't satisfy her desire. And these two, Echo and the goddess Nemesis, conspire to make Narcissus fall in love with himself, a relationship that cannot be fulfilled. And these two female characters completely destroy his life, which really highlights the old adage, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Now, this is a punishment they inflict on him for simply not being interested in someone, which of course means Narcissus was not in love with himself, he was not interested in himself, he was not in love with himself to begin with, as Narcissus could not have been in love with himself if he was then forced through magic to fall in love with himself as punishment. This demonstrates so clearly, and why it is so fundamental to understand that the story of Narcissus is a myth, a story that never happened to people who never existed, a questionable moral tale. It's not an actual case study of an actual human being, as Narcissus is the son of the blue nymph Liriope of Thespia and the river god Sisyphus. And Echo is a wood nymph, who is not a human being either, nor is the goddess Nemesis a human being. There are a number of problems with the myth of Narcissus being used for this psychological condition that is now called narcissistic personality disorder in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. The first of these problems, which, as I stated, is that the condition is not based on actual case studies of actual human beings, but rather based on a made-up story about people who never even existed. It also ignores, for instance, the myths of Daphne, the daughter of the river god Peneus, and also ignores the myth of Diana, the daughter of Zeus and Leto, and also the twin sister of Apollo. Both Daphne and Diana rejected all lovers. Her father, Daphne's, often said to her, "Daughter, you owe me a son-in-law. You owe me grandchildren." She said, hating the thought of marriage as a crime, with her beautiful face all tinged all over with blushes, threw her arms around her father's neck and said, "Dearest father, grant me this favor, that I may always remain unmarried, like Diana." He consented, but at the same time said, "Your own face will forbid it." She sounds a lot like Narcissus, doesn't she? Furthermore, if psychiatrists and psychologists want to use the moral tales involved in Greek and Roman mythology as psychological deviations then it would follow that all people are psychologically unfit, and virtually every choice they make, as all these Greek myths are based on common human foibles. In the fields of psychiatry and psychology, can name psychological conditions based on every Greek and Roman myth that there is. Anyone that they choose. They can just make this stuff up. Now, the most troubling part of this mental condition, known as narcissism, is that narcissist does not do anything to anyone. He does not lie to women. He doesn't abuse them. He doesn't cheat on them, mock them. There's nothing pathological about anyone who chooses not to have a relationship with someone else. That is, in fact, normal. Is anyone really promoting the concept that because someone desires you, then you must have a relationship with them? The only actual pathology in this story is the inability of Echo to accept rejection, which causes Echo to embark on a behavior to destroy Narcissus' life. We know this in human behavior as, if I can't have you, then no one else can. And this is genuine pathology. The mental condition delineated by the story of Narcissus would have to be called echoism in an accurate analysis of this myth. Echoism, not narcissism, would be the pathology. Upon a serious analysis of the literature involved, it is clear that neither Oedipus Rex nor the myth of Narcissus have anything to do with the conditions called the Oedipus complex or narcissism, nor are there any kind of genuine psychological problems or conditions, universal or otherwise. I repeat, these so-called psychological conditions have nothing to do with the literary origins they are named after, except in someone's exaggerated imaginings. So, the famous stories of Oedipus Rex, Narcissus, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are all the basis for bogus psychological conditions that use these famous stories to give them a validity that cannot be shown through any kind of scientific investigation. In fact, the word dissociative, as in dissociative identity disorder, is itself a word right out of the pages of the science fiction tale Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is partially told through written correspondence. Near the end of the novella, under Dr. Jekyll's written statement, entitled Henry Jekyll's Full Statement of the Case, in this sentence, he says, "How then were the two dissociated?" referring to the two minds of Jekyll and Hyde. Dissociate, in reference to the human mind, is not a psychological term, but a science fiction concept. Now my book had a new title: Literature, Psychology, and Psychiatry. Now that's the end of part 2. I will be putting up part 3 shortly. The link will be in the description. Thank you for your time.